Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a sci-fi horror film, Species, Part 1. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie takes place in the US government laboratories at Utah, where a 12-year-old girl, Sil, sleeps in her containment chamber. She shortly wakes up confused as scientists surround her chamber, carrying cyanide gas tanks. She looks up to see the head of the experiment. The head scientist named Fitch mouths an apology to her. Soon, two scientists install cyanide gas tanks to her chamber and release the gas to kill her. They expect her to die, but Sil only breaks the glass window and escapes until she exits the laboratory. She then climbs into a moving cargo train to hide from her pursuers. Later on, she decides to sleep, but a transient interrupts her slumber to assault her. Thankfully, she possesses great strength that's enough to throw the transient onto a wall, killing him instantly. Afterward, she steals his clothes to blend among the people. The next morning, Fitch and his team thoroughly sweep the perimeter to search for Sil, but they can't find any traces of her. Meanwhile, the cargo train arrives at the train station, and Sil goes out to eat, but she has no money. She also fails to steal food, so she just leaves the store. Outside, she snatches a duffel bag from an unattended cart and boards a train bound for Los Angeles. Inside the train, she steals money from the cash register and more food in the train's kitchen to satisfy her starvation. Later on, Sil returns to her room and pays for her ticket in half price to the conductor, who willingly gives her a discount for being a kid. In the evening, Fitch and his team arrive at the train station, but they only find the dead transient in the cargo train. They confirm Sil killed the dead man due to her DNA and hormone traces on his body. Out of desperation, Fitch's team suggests stopping all train activities, but it would arouse suspicion among the police. They must maintain discretion while searching for her, so Fitch composes a specialized crew to hunt down Sil. In the lab, Fitch meets the crew, who are responsible for tracking down Sil. The team consists of Dr. Stephen, an anthropologist, Dr. Laura, a molecular biologist, Dan, a heightened empath, and Preston, a mercenary. They familiarize themselves first, before Fitch briefs them about past events and their current situation. It's revealed that in November 1974, a project was initiated at Arecibo to search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and they used powerful radio dishes to convey a message in the heavens, searching for any alien civilization. Their message includes vital information about humankind, like human DNA structure, a map of the solar system, and Earth population. In January 1993, they finally received two messages from an unknown extraterrestrial in the cosmos. The first message was a superior catalyst for methane to produce an infinite source of energy, and the second is an instruction on how to combine a new DNA structure with human DNA. Afterward, Fitch and his team injected the hybrid DNA structure into 100 human ova, but only 3 survived. While the 2 were stored, the remaining ova, with codename S1L, is permitted to mature, but we prefer to call her Sil. Fitch made Sil a female because of an assumption that women are more docile and controllable than men. Moreover, Sil showed a rapid growth rate, like turning 12 after 3 months of birth. One night, they caught on camera her back moving while she was asleep. The unexplainable movement in Sil's body compelled the team to terminate her out of fear, but she escaped during the attempt to kill her, as shown at the beginning of the film. Now Fitch concludes he needs the crew to hunt down Sil to prevent more unwanted deaths, like the transient in the cargo train. Meanwhile, Sil undergoes the next phase at the train, where her body extends tentacles to form a cocoon shell, so she can mature into a fully developed adult. She also murders the conductor mercilessly, and subsequently emerges naked from the shell as an adult woman. The following morning, Sil arrives in LA. She then leaves the train, wearing the conductor's uniform. On her way out of the station, Sil sees a queue of blonde girls, thinking they're part of Fitch's search operation for her. Meanwhile, the crew goes to the train where Sil was before, and finds her shell and the dead conductor in her room. They know that Sil's an adult now, just by the look of the cocoon in front of them. Thus, they've been searching for the wrong body the whole time. Outside the train, Preston requests to keep track of the transactional activities of the conductor's credit card, because he presumes Sil has taken it. Dan also incites that Sil remorselessly kills when she's threatened. Stephen agrees and informs everyone that LA is the perfect place for Sil to hide, since people rarely notice anything wrong in that place. At LA, while Sil buys a gown from a pregnant tailor, she gazes at the tailor's baby bump. She next tours the city, where she encounters mothers with their children passing by on the street. Afterward, she rents a room at a motel, and inside, she scans television shows, displaying the car crash, a man and woman making out, a hair dye commercial, and even a Daniel C.C. horror movie. Meanwhile, the crew arrive in LA, where they stay in a hotel while the operation is active. At the lobby, Laura suggests doing an experiment solely focusing on the alien DNA structure in order to learn its weaknesses. They agree with Laura, since Sil definitely uses her human features to camouflage among the people. Fitch then shortly permits their offer and allows them to use the laboratory installed in the hotel to learn what kind of creature they're dealing with. At the lab, Laura leads the test by injecting the alien DNA structure into a cell, but during the experiment, the installed camera facing the cell shuts down suddenly. Laura goes to replace the camera herself. Preston accompanies her inside the chamber, where the injected cell is inside a glass box case. When Laura finally replaces the camera, Fitch and others watch the cell mutating rapidly on the monitor. Fitch rushes Laura and Preston to close the lid, but Preston drops the bolt on the floor grill. Dan then asks Fitch to open the doors, but he refuses because it's against protocol to open the doors while the lid is still unsealed. In a matter of minutes, the cell grows into a large tentacle, and Fitch activates an incinerator to burn the tentacle, but it only evades the fire and hides in between the pipes. Preston snatches a pipe on the wall and pierces the tentacle repeatedly until it stops moving. Just then, Fitch activates the emergency button to burn the whole room because the tentacle is still alive, spreading rapidly on the walls. However, it burns the whole room, including Preston and Laura inside the containment. Dan and Stephen want to save them, so Dan restrains Fitch away from the panel, and Stephen quickly pushes the button to open the doors. After the two safely go outside, Stephen burns the whole room to kill the tentacle. Meanwhile, Sil asks the motel manager where to find a hormone-rich man, and the manager recommends a club nearby. But before she leaves, the manager asks for Sil's card in case an emergency occurs in her room while she's away. Sil gives the conductor's card, and the moment it is swiped on the machine, the transaction appears on the crew's list of tracks. While the crew rushes to the motel, Sil enters the club that was recommended to her. Just then, a man invites her to dance, but a curly-haired woman interjects and steals him from her. Sil perceives the curly-haired woman as a competition, so she follows her to the bathroom and eliminates her permanently. She then returns to the dance floor, removes her top, and invites a clubber for some action. Soon, he and Sil go to the parking lot and drive on the way to his mansion. Meanwhile, the crew visits the motel to retrieve the surveillance footage that caught Sil's blurry face on camera. Fitch asks for the tape so they can analyze the footage thoroughly in the lab. Afterward, Fitch asks the manager where Sil has gone, and the manager says to the club nearby. At the club, a female clubber screams for help when she finds the dead curly-haired woman in the bathroom stall. The crew arrives shortly to see the corpse, but there's no sign of Sil. They proceed to interrogate the bouncers if Sil entered the club earlier, and one of them says she left with a male clubber. Meanwhile, the clubber and Sil arrive at his mansion. He entices her to begin. Sil suddenly withdraws and wants to leave, possibly because his hormone smell is not fit for her. As expected, he furiously grabs Sil's hair, forcing her to a workout session with him. Sil pretends to kiss him passionately and kills him using her elongated, juicy tongue. Afterward, Sil rinses off the blood in the shower. Just then, the crew surrounds the mansion, but Sil escapes quickly with the clubber's BMW after sensing their arrival. Preston surveys the area first and finds the clubber lying dead on the floor. Fitch questions why Sil killed the curly-haired woman and the clubber. Stephen answers Sil is a psychopath who doesn't have moral senses and social structure. Laura adds that Sil didn't grow up being taught with good manners or feel love from anyone. However, Fitch feels unsatisfied with their answers, so Dan simplifies that the clubber did something bad, which provoked Sil to kill him, because Sil kills anyone who threatens or intervenes in her way of the life cycle. Laura concludes that Sil is trying to reproduce with a hormone-rich man, which is why she killed the woman due to sexual competition. Moreover, they find evidence that Sil rejected the clubber because he was too diabetic, based on the insulin bottle in his bathroom bin. Overall, Sil only mates with someone healthy, and not with someone who has genetic damage, defects, or hereditary disease. Next, Fitch orders to track down the clubber's BMW to find Sil's whereabouts. Afterward, they plan to return to the motel to examine Sil's rented room. Preston spontaneously mentions Fitch's assumption about women being docile and controllable, which is proven wrong after dealing with Sil. At the motel, the crew examines Sil's room. Laura takes a sample of Sil's blood, drop it on the toilet seat to know if it's menstrual blood, because if it does, then Sil's capable of reproduction. Meanwhile, Sil drives in front of the motel, but since she finds it surrounded by Fitch's men, Sil travels to Santa Monica and falls asleep in the car. The next morning, Sil wakes up after dreaming about mating with an alien while in her alien form. She goes back to driving, but she soon runs out of gas, so she abandons it and decides to take a stroll. Unfortunately, a reckless driver runs at Sil, throwing her onto the bus stop. Sil is badly wounded, but a kind businessman nicknamed Mr. Wright rushes her to Park Bay Hospital immediately. At Park Bay Hospital, Mr. Wright pays for Sil's medical bills via credit card. Meanwhile, a doctor examines Sil's wounds, but he freezes upon witnessing Sil healing herself. Sil exits the room like nothing happened, leaving the doctor astounded. She then meets Mr. Wright to ask if they can finally go back to his home. Meanwhile, the crew is at the laboratory, trying to enhance the surveillance footage of Sil, but it's useless since she didn't face the camera. Afterward, they tackle Sil's biological aspect, presuming Sil is in her 20s already with a fully developed reproductive system, since her biological clock is in hyperdrive. They worry that if Sil manages to give birth to a male offspring who has the same growth rate as hers, it could impregnate more women after 6 months of reaching maturity. Just then, they receive a report about the clubber's abandoned BMW in Santa Monica. Soon, the crew arrives in the city, where they find the clubber's car. Fitch's assistant informs them about a doctor in Park Bay who witnessed a miraculous regeneration earlier. Instantly, they know he's talking about Sil, so Fitch sends his team to investigate the hospital. At the hospital, the duo learns a man called Mr. Wright brought Sil to the ER due to a hit and run. They need to locate Mr. Wright's address, but the receptionist tells them that Mr. Wright only disclosed his card details. Fortunately, Laura tracks Mr. Wright using only his card information. They eventually learn his address in no time and proceed to travel to his house. Meanwhile, Mr. Wright brings Sil to his home, where they take a Polaroid together, but Sil looks away due to the blinding flash. Next, Sil persistently tries to mate with Mr. Wright, but he refuses. Soon, their attempt is interrupted when the crew arrives in the vicinity. She then transforms to her bipedal alien form, where her back and shoulders sprout elongated tentacles. She kills Mr. Wright and seeks refuge in his garden to hide from the crew. Preston and Laura enter first, seeing dead Mr. Wright afloat in the hot tub. Preston surveys the garden, but he fails to find Sil, who's hiding behind a wooden fence. Eventually, the crew searches the vicinity thoroughly, concluding Sil failed to mate with Mr. Wright despite her fondness for him. Meanwhile, Sil reverts to her naked human form, runs to a nearby store, and pretends to be a victim of assault. A woman falls for her trap and soon gets tied up by Sil in her own car. Sil then returns to Mr. Wright's mansion to eavesdrop on the crew's discussion in the front yard. Sil reads Fitch's lips, learning their plan of staking the whole club tomorrow night as they anticipate her arrival. The next morning, Sil plots to fake her death to stop them from pursuing her. She first mutilates her thumb and the woman she abducted. Next, she formulates a scenario where she'd crash into the transformer below the hill. Then, she hoards gas in plastic bottles and transfers them all to another car she has stolen. That night, Sil goes to the club to lure the crew, provoking them to chase her. Sil rides in the stolen car filled with gas, and the abducted woman sits beside her. She drives straight to the hills as the crew pursues her. Just as she planned, she swerves the car off-hill and directly crashes the car onto the transformer, causing an explosion. Afterward, the choppers drop cluster bombs onto the explosion to be certain that Sil is dead. Fitch is convinced that Sil is dead because his team found a severed, charred thumb stuck on the door that was ripped off. Fitch assumes Sil failed to escape, but Dan and Preston find the whole victory to be coincidental and convenient. Fitch doesn't listen anymore and dismisses them because their job is finished. In fact, Sil is still alive. She escaped just in time before the car exploded. She also dyes her hair brunette and cuts it short to test if the crew can recognize her. When she is finally at the hotel, no one recognizes her at all. She then uses the chance to mate with Preston, but Preston is already busy with Laura in her room. Sil gets jealous, but she shortly recovers upon seeing Stephen enter the room. Stephen feels lucky to have a free sex, and Sil successfully gets pregnant afterward. But he soon realizes her true identity, which causes Sil to kill him. Meanwhile, Dan warns the crew that Sil is in the building. They initially doubt if it's true, until they see Stephen dead, and Sil breaks out from his room in her alien form. The crew pursues Sil to the sewer under the hotel while equipped with flamethrowers. At the sewer, Dan fails to locate Sil because she's underwater, prompting the group to split up. Unfortunately, Sil immediately murders Fitch the moment he's alone. Afterward, Sil seeks refuge in a nearby cave, where she finally gives birth to a male offspring, who matures into a toddler under a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, the team arrives at the cave, where they see an oil pond in the middle. Just then, Dan meets Sil's offspring, coaxing him to join them, but the offspring attacks him, causing him to stumble backward. Laura, who's behind Dan, drops onto the oil pond and gets stuck. Dan stands back up quickly and incinerates the offspring, but he staggers as the offspring leap above him, catching fire and falling into the oil pond. The oil pond bursts into flames, and Dan dangles on the edge. The offspring screeches while dying from the heat, alerting Sil from her hideout. On the other hand, Laura is stuck and shouts to ask for Preston's help, but he's busy fighting against Sil, where he manages to amputate one of her GPS tentacles. Eventually, Laura escapes from the oil pond before the fire completely spreads and climbs to help Dan. The movie ends with Preston successfully gunning down Sil until she drops into the burning oil. Laura then helps Preston to hoist Dan from the edge, but Sil grabs Dan's feet to ascend. Fortunately, Preston quickly reloads his shotgun to burst Sill's head to pieces. Subsequently, the 3 survivors exit the cave and return to the hotel. However, after their small victory, a mutated rat transforms after gnawing Sill's mutilated tentacle and eats another rat. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.